My husband was disgusted by me, but I showed him a video I found of him with. At 72 years old, my husband told me I disgusted him. You heard that right. Disgust, like I was something dirty, a plate of spoiled food, garbage. My name's Eleanor, folks call me Ellie, and for more than 4 decades I lived with a man who, in the last years of our life together, started looking at me like I was some kind of disease. Have you ever felt what it's like to be despised in your own home? That pain of realizing someone who slept beside you for years now can barely stand being near you? That's how I lived the final years of my marriage. And the truth nobody tells you is that sometimes we accept this kind of treatment because we think we don't deserve anything better at our age. That's how the story that would change my life forever began. If you're new here, subscribe now, because this story will leave you speechless. I live in Cleveland, in a simple 3-bedroom house in one of those old neighborhoods where everybody knows everybody. We bought it when our kids were still little. The living room has that old-fashioned hardwood floor that I always kept polished with red wax. The walls are light green, a color I chose because it reminds me of my mama's backyard in West Virginia, where I grew up. Our house isn't big, but it's always been well cared for. I take pride in my garden out back, especially my purple roses that even the neighbors stop to admire when they pass by. I'm retired now, but I worked as a nursing assistant at Cleveland General for 32 years. I cared for so many people, saw so much pain, so many sad and happy stories, that I think it gave me special strength to endure what I went through. I've always been one of those hard-working women with steady hands. I wake up early, even after retiring. By 5 in the morning, I'm already up, brewing coffee, tidying the house, getting on with life. I have 3 kids, Mark, 49, who's an accountant living in Chicago, Sarah, 45, who's a teacher right here in Cleveland, and Richard, 41, who works with computers in the next town over. My husband, Frank, is 76. He used to be a bank manager, one of those who was respected throughout the whole neighborhood back in the day. He retired about 15 years ago. When he first retired, he was still the same man I married, attentive, playful, enjoyed watching TV shows with me, commented on the characters, joined me when visiting the kids. We had our routine, our little joys as an old couple. It wasn't movie-style love, full of flowers and declarations, but it was comfortable companionship, like a pair of shoes you've worn so long you don't even feel them on your feet. I remember how he loved my chicken and dumplings, how he'd strike up conversations about just about anything during dinner, how we had the habit of having coffee on the porch on Sunday mornings, listening to the birds and talking about the news. He had a hearty laugh, the kind that makes your eyes close and your cheeks rise up. When our grandkids were born, he seemed to have gained a new lease on life. He'd play, tell stories, take them to the park to play ball near our house. I cherish a photo of us on our 40th wedding anniversary. We had a small party, just family, in Richard's building's party room. In the photo, we're both smiling. Me in a green dress my daughter helped me choose. Him in a white linen shirt. It seemed like we still had so much ahead of us. Back then, he still called me his old lady, affectionately, you know. We still kissed occasionally, hugged when it was cold, sometimes fell asleep holding hands. But something began to change after that anniversary. Slowly, almost without me noticing, like water dripping slowly until one day it forms a big puddle. First, there were little things. He started pulling away in bed. Then, he stopped kissing me. Conversations at the table got shorter, colder. Sunday coffees on the porch ended. He started spending more time away from home, saying he was meeting friends at the corner bar. He'd come back smelling of beer, though he didn't seem drunk. It was around this time that Mr. Gilbert moved into the house next door. A younger man than us, must have been about 55, divorced, no children. Soon he and Frank became friends. My husband said Gilbert knew about football, that it was good to talk with someone who liked the same teams. At first, I didn't see anything wrong. I even thought it was nice that he had a friend nearby. But then came the nights when he said he was just having a beer at the neighbor's house and came back later and later. The times he complained about my cooking, saying it had no taste, that I didn't know how to cook like before. The comments about my appearance, that my hair was too long for a lady my age, that I should stop using that old perfume, that my clothes were out of style. One night, I caught him looking at me with an expression I'll never forget. We were in the living room, me knitting and him flipping through a magazine. I got up to fetch a glass of water, and when I came back, I caught that look. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was disgust, as if I were a cockroach that had suddenly appeared in the middle of the clean living room. In that moment, I felt a chill in my stomach, the kind you feel when you receive very bad news. "What is it, Frank?" I asked, holding the glass tightly so my hand wouldn't tremble. He quickly looked away and answered in a dry voice, "Nothing." But it wasn't nothing. It was everything. It was the beginning of the end. I just didn't know it yet. Our house in the old neighborhood of Cleveland tells its own story just by looking at it. We bought it in 1980, when the area was a whole lot simpler than it is today. Back then, we paid for it with real sacrifice. Frank had just landed that job at the bank, and I picked up extra shifts at the hospital to scrape together every penny. I remember clear as day when we signed those papers. It was a Thursday with a cloudless sky, and I was so nervous my hand shook when I signed. We left the notary and went straight to buy a cheap bottle of wine to celebrate. Having our own home was a dream come true. In the beginning, it was just Frank, me, and Mark, who was just a little thing then. Sarah was born 2 years after we moved in, and Richard came along 3 years after her. That house witnessed everything: the children's first steps, birthday parties in the backyard with chocolate cake I baked myself, the sibling squabbles, Christmases with a full table, and the tough times when money was tight. On our street, everybody knew everybody. There was Mrs. Wilson, who ran the bakery at the corner, always saving the freshest bread for me. Old Mr. Johnson from the repair shop, who sometimes fixed our blue Chevy without charging for labor because I'd taken care of his mother at the hospital. And Martha, my widowed neighbor on the left, who'd have coffee with me almost every afternoon, always bringing a slice of cake or cookies. Our neighborhood was full of life. Kids played tag and dodgeball on the sidewalks until dark. Women would sit on their stoops after dinner to chat, while the men played dominoes at a makeshift table under the maple tree in the park. Those were different times. Times when you'd leave your door just pulled to when you ran to the corner store, when a neighbor would lend you sugar and you'd return it with a piece of whatever you baked. Our routine was simple but comfortable. Frank would leave early for the bank, dressed in those dark suits I'd ironed so carefully. I'd prepare breakfast for everyone, get the kids ready for school, and then head to the hospital. At night, we'd meet back at home. We'd have dinner together, with the children telling us what was new at school. Afterward, Frank would check their homework while I cleaned up the kitchen. On weekends, we'd go to Sunday service, then have lunch at my mother's or his mother's, alternating Sundays. As the kids grew up, our house was always full. Mark's friends would play video games in the living room, Sarah's girlfriends would try on clothes and makeup in her bedroom, and Richard would bring his buddies over to study at the kitchen table. Frank sometimes complained about the noise, but I could tell he secretly liked having a full house. He was respected by our children's friends, who called him Mr. Frank, and asked him for advice about school and work. The 80s were tough financially for everyone in America, with that inflation eating away at our money. I remember going to the supermarket at the beginning of the month and filling the cart, because by the end of the month, prices would be sky high. During this time, Frank would stay up late, worrying, doing calculations, afraid we wouldn't be able to make the house payments. I worked miracles with food, stretching what we had, inventing recipes with whatever was left in the fridge. But the kids never went without the necessities. When Reagan's economic plan kicked in around '83, we actually believed things would get better. Frank got a raise at the bank, and we managed to replace the living room furniture, which was getting pretty worn. We bought a dark green sofa set that seemed so fancy at the time. That sofa lasted more than 20 years. We only replaced it when Richard was already in college. The house also saw our fights, of course. What couple doesn't fight? Frank had a strong temper, especially when he'd had a few too many at Sunday barbecues, Sometimes he'd get irritated about little things, like a bill I'd forgotten to pay or a shirt that wasn't ironed well. I had my moments too, especially when he'd come home late from work without calling, leaving me worried sick. But nothing that couldn't be resolved with a conversation, or, at most, a few days of cold shoulders. Our bedroom was simple. A double bed we bought when we got married, 2 dark wood nightstands, a large wardrobe that occupied almost an entire wall. On the dresser were photo frames with family pictures. There was one from our wedding, me in a simple dress and him in a suit borrowed from his brother-in-law. There were photos of the kids when they were small, their graduations, our 25th wedding anniversary. It was in that bedroom that we shared so many nights. Nights of love. Nights of worry about sick children. Nights of talking until late about the future. Nights of silence when we were upset with each other. It was in that bedroom that little by little we grew apart. Time passed. The kids grew up and left home. First Mark, who went to work in Chicago. Then Sarah, who got married and moved to the other side of town. Finally Richard, who bought an apartment in the next town over. Suddenly, it was just the 2 of us in the big house. At first it was strange. The silence seemed to scream from the walls. But we adapted. Frank retired, and I continued working for a few more years, until I retired too. That's when we started creating new habits. He began taking more care of the garden, planted cherry and apple trees in the backyard. I started attending a craft group at church, learning to make crochet rugs. On Saturday mornings, we'd go together to the neighborhood farmer's market, carrying canvas bags I had made myself. He'd choose the fruits, I'd pick the vegetables. It seemed like we'd found a new rhythm for our life together. The grandkids started coming. First Sarah's children, then Richard's. Mark took longer. He only had a child when he was almost 40. Our house filled with noise again on weekends. Frank seemed to grow younger when the grandkids arrived. He'd play with them on the floor, tell stories about when he was a boy in Pennsylvania, make paper airplanes that flew far. I think that was the best phase of our marriage. We had time, we had reasonable health, we had grandchildren to brighten the house. We didn't need to worry so much about money. The big debts were paid. We could even take small trips, like when we went to see Niagara Falls, or when we spent a week at Myrtle Beach. But time, which builds, also destroys. Gradually, I began to notice changes in Frank. Nothing too obvious at first. He started going out more on his own, said he was meeting retired friends at the club. He'd come back somewhat different, not drunk, but with a strange gleam in his eyes. When I asked about the get-together, the answers were vague, as if he were hiding something. It was around this time that Gilbert moved into the house next door. The house that used to belong to Martha, who passed away leaving only nephews who didn't want to live there and ended up selling it. When Gilbert arrived, Frank immediately offered to help with the moving. I thought it was a nice gesture. After all, that's how you welcome a new neighbor. But I had no idea that arrival would change everything in our lives. Gilbert arrived on an April morning with a moving truck and plenty of energy. He was a tall man with broad shoulders, well-trimmed gray hair, and an easy smile. Must have been around 55, but kept himself in good shape. Divorced was how he introduced himself when he came over to say hello, bringing a bottle of wine as a gift for his new neighbors. Frank received him with enthusiasm, like he'd found a long-lost friend. Ellie, Gilbert used to work in finance too. What a coincidence, Frank commented excitedly during that first visit. The two quickly started talking about investments, banks, stocks, all those things I never quite understood. I served coffee and put out some homemade biscuits I'd baked that morning and sat listening to their conversation. I noticed how Frank talked with his hands, gesturing more than usual, and how his eyes had a different kind of sparkle. At first, I thought it was good that my husband had found a friend to share interests with. After he retired, he complained that his old colleagues from the bank had disappeared, that nobody called him anymore. Gilbert seemed to fill that gap. In the first few months, they watched football together, had beers in the late afternoon, sometimes went out to play pool at a bar nearby. It was at our oldest grandson's birthday party, Peter, Sarah's boy, when I noticed the first strange sign. We were all gathered in the party room of her building. There was cake, finger foods, soda for the kids, beer for the adults. Frank was sitting at a table with Richard and Sarah's husband, chatting animatedly, when Gilbert showed up. We hadn't invited him, but Frank had mentioned the party, and apparently the neighbor felt comfortable enough to drop by. The moment Gilbert walked in, I saw Frank change completely. He sat up straighter in his chair, fixed his hair with his hand, and his face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. He stood up immediately, went to greet the neighbor with a lingering hug, and brought him to sit at our table. For a moment, it was as if the rest of the family didn't even exist. Sarah gave me a curious look, and I just shrugged my shoulders. After that day, their friendship intensified. Frank started talking about Gilbert all the time. Gilbert said this. Gilbert does that. Gilbert showed me an interesting investment. Once, when I was washing his clothes, I found a handkerchief in his shirt pocket that wasn't ours. It was a silk handkerchief, one of those expensive ones with embroidered initials, GM, Gilbert Morris. When I asked about it, Frank turned red, said his neighbor had lent it to him on a rainy day and he'd forgotten to return it. But what really started to bother me was the change in Frank's behavior toward me. He, who had always been a man of habits, began changing his routine. He started dressing better just to stay at home, bought new shirts, started wearing a cologne he'd never used before. At the same time, he began finding fault with my habits, my clothes, my way of being. Ellie, that outfit's not right for your age anymore, he'd say, looking at the floral dress I wore to church. That perfume of yours is too strong, gives me a headache, he'd complain, even though it was the same perfume I'd worn for years and he'd never criticized before. One night, after returning from Gilbert's house, Frank found me watching a TV show in the living room. He sat far away from me on the other sofa and kept observing me with a strange look. What is it? I asked, uncomfortable with that gaze. Nothing, he answered, but he kept staring. It's just that Gilbert was telling me about his ex-wife, how she took care of herself, went to the gym, dressed well. Even after 50, she looked much younger. That hit me like a slap. I understood what he was implying. That I, unlike Gilbert's ex-wife, didn't take care of myself, was sloppy, old. I felt my face burn with shame and anger. But I swallowed the response I wanted to give. I just got up and went to the bedroom, leaving him alone in the living room. The next day, I went to the hairdresser and asked them to cut my hair, which had been long down to my waist. I left there with a short, modern cut that the stylist said made me look younger. I bought a new blouse, in a shade of purple the saleswoman guaranteed would complement my skin tone. When I got home, Frank barely noticed the change. He just asked how much I'd spent and made a face when I told him. It was around this time that he began avoiding meals with me. He'd say he'd already eaten out, or that he wasn't hungry. When he did sit at the table, he barely touched the food I prepared. One day, I made the chicken and dumplings he loved so much. He took one bite, chewed slowly, and said, "It doesn't taste the same. Did you change the recipe?" "It's the same as always, Frank," I replied, feeling a lump in my throat. "Well, it doesn't seem like it. It's bland." He left the plate almost full and left the table. That night, I heard him rummaging in the refrigerator late at night. He was hungry, but he preferred not to eat what I had made. It was the first time I cried hidden in the bathroom, with the faucet running so he wouldn't hear me. The small humiliations added up. One morning, he abruptly pulled away when I tried to give him a good morning kiss. One Sunday, when we were getting ready to go to Sarah's house, he looked me up and down and said I looked tired. I wasn't tired. I'd spent extra time getting ready, even putting on makeup, hoping to please him. I started wondering if he was having an affair. It was the most obvious explanation, wasn't it? A man his age, suddenly caring about his appearance, staying out late, being distant with his wife. But with whom? We'd lived in this neighborhood for decades. I knew all the women around. None seemed like the type to have an affair with a married man, let alone one in his 70s. Then one afternoon, I was in the kitchen when I heard laughter from Gilbert's backyard. I peeked out the window and saw Frank there, helping Gilbert plant some flowers. They were working side by side, talking and laughing like old friends. Nothing strange about that, except for the way Frank kept finding excuses to touch Gilbert's arm, the way his eyes lingered a little too long when Gilbert wasn't looking. A strange thought crossed my mind, but I dismissed it immediately. No, it couldn't be. Frank? After 50 years of marriage, 3 children, 7 grandchildren? It was impossible. But the thought kept coming back, especially when Frank started spending more and more time next door. He'd leave right after breakfast, saying he was going to help Gilbert with some project. He'd come back for lunch sometimes, but often he'd just call to say he was eating at a friend's. By dinner time, he'd be home, but distracted, checking his phone constantly, as if waiting for a message. One day, I decided to check his phone while he was in the shower. I'd never done anything like that before. I'd always respected his privacy. But things had gotten to the point where I needed to know. The phone was locked, but I knew his password, our wedding anniversary date, ironically. When I opened his messages, there they were. Dozens of texts between him and Gilbert. Most were innocent enough, talking about sports or the stock market. But then, I found one that made my heart stop. Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again. G. And Frank's reply, me too, finding it harder to pretend at home. I put the phone back exactly as I'd found it, my hands shaking. So it was true. My husband of nearly 50 years was having an affair with another man. That night at dinner, I watched Frank pushing food around his plate, barely eating, as usual. I wondered if he was thinking about Gilbert, if he was counting the minutes until he could leave the table, go to his separate bedroom, and text his, what? Lover? Boyfriend? What do you call the man your 76-year-old husband is having an affair with? Is something wrong with the pork chops? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt inside. They're fine, he muttered, not looking up. Just not hungry. You've barely eaten anything all week, I observed. You feeling all right? I'm fine, Ellie, he snapped. Just drop it, okay? That night, lying alone in my bed, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront him, not yet. First, I needed proof. Real, undeniable proof. And I knew just how to get it. The situation was becoming more and more difficult. One morning, I was hanging clothes on the line when I heard voices coming from Gilbert's backyard. I recognized Frank's hearty laugh, that warm chuckle I hadn't heard around our house in ages. I stayed quiet, behind the white sheet flapping in the breeze, and peeked at the two of them. They were sitting at a garden table, having coffee, looking so comfortable with each other. Gilbert was telling some story, and Frank was laughing, throwing his head back, just like in the old days. For a moment, I felt a pang of jealousy. Not of Gilbert, but of that happiness my husband no longer showed with me. It was that week when Frank announced he'd be sleeping in the guest room from now on. We were having dinner, in silence as had become our custom, when he said, without looking up from his plate, Ellie, I'm going to start sleeping in the other room. Your snoring doesn't let me rest properly. I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. Snoring? I'd always snored since I was young. When we got married, he even joked about it, saying my snoring was like music that helped him sleep. In 45 years of marriage, it had never been an issue. But Frank, I've always snored. You never complained before, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. It's worse now, he cut me off dryly, and I don't sleep well. At my age, I need proper rest. That very night, he moved some clothes to the guest room closet and took his pillow. I remember lying alone in our double bed, looking at the empty side, feeling an even emptier space in my chest. That night, I didn't even cry. I just stared at the ceiling, thinking about how we had reached this point. The next day, a Thursday, my daughter Sarah came to visit. She always dropped by on her days off from work, bringing the grandkids to see me. I could tell she noticed something was off when she saw the guest room with her father's things. Mom, is everything okay between you and Dad? She asked, while the kids were watching cartoons in the living room. Yes, honey. Your father's having back problems, sleeps better in the other bed because it's firmer, I lied. I didn't want her to worry, nor did I want to expose the problems in my marriage. In my day, we didn't talk about these things, not even to our children. Couple problems are solved between the couple. That's how I was raised. Sarah didn't seem very convinced, but she didn't push it. Before leaving, she hugged me tighter than usual and said, "If you need anything, call me, okay, Mom? I'm always here for you." That hug nearly made me crumble. But I held it together until she left with the kids. Only then did I let the tears flow while washing the dishes from the coffee we'd had. You know, as I tell this part of my story, I'm thinking about you listening right now. Maybe you're carrying a weight that nobody sees, a pain you keep to yourself. Sometimes we feel so alone in our battles, don't we? I'd really like to know what you're feeling. If you want to share, leave a comment saying, "I understand this pain because I've also experienced." It can be just a word. You don't need to tell everything. Your comment might be the hug someone needs right now. Did you know that? There are so many people watching in silence, thinking they're the only ones suffering this way. When you share a little bit of your story, you show others they're not alone. It's like reaching out your hand to someone in the dark. And as I continue my story, know that I'm here, listening to you with an open heart. It was on a Sunday afternoon, about 2 weeks later, that something happened that changed everything. Frank had gone out after lunch, saying he was going to watch the game at Gilbert's house. I stayed home, watching my Sunday programs on TV. Around 4 in the afternoon, I realized we were out of coffee. Frank liked to have coffee when he came back from watching football, so I decided to go to the bakery to buy a fresh pack. I was walking back home when I saw Frank's car parked on the street, not in our garage, but a little further down. I found it strange. If he had come back, why didn't he park the car in the usual spot? I approached and saw the car was empty. I looked around and noticed it was parked exactly in front of Gilbert's house. I decided to wait a little while before going home, wanting to understand what was happening. I sat on a bench in the little park that was almost opposite our houses and watched. About 20 minutes passed when I saw Gilbert's door open. Frank came out first, looking around as if checking if anyone was watching. Gilbert followed right behind, and then I saw something that left me paralyzed. My husband turned and gave a kiss on the neighbor's cheek. Not a friend's kiss, not a pat on the back like men usually do. It was a lingering kiss, near the mouth, with an intimacy that left no doubt. I felt like the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. My heart raced. My hands started sweating, and the coffee package nearly slipped from my fingers. I quickly hid behind a tree so they wouldn't see me. Frank got in the car and drove off. He didn't come home. He continued down the main street, probably going around the block so I'd think he was just now returning from the game. I walked slowly back home, trying to organize my thoughts. So many things started to make sense. The frequent outings, the changes in behavior, the distance, the separate bedroom. It wasn't that he was disgusted by me as a woman. It was that he didn't want any woman anymore. But why not talk to me? Why humiliate me, make me feel old, ugly, undesirable? So many years together, and he didn't trust me enough to tell the truth? I entered the house and put the coffee away in the kitchen, moving like a robot, not really thinking about what I was doing. I sat at the kitchen table and stayed there, staring into space, trying to decide what to do next. Part of me wanted to confront Frank as soon as he arrived, to throw in his face what I'd seen. Another part wanted to pretend I didn't know anything, to continue living the lie because it was easier, less painful. And there was still a third part, the one that was beginning to understand many things, to connect the dots, to realize that maybe Frank was living in his own private hell, trapped between what he felt and what he thought he should be. About half an hour later, I heard the sound of the gate. Frank walked in, newspaper under his arm, as if he were really returning from watching the game at some bar. "The Browns won," he announced, throwing the newspaper on the table. 21-14. "That's good," I replied automatically, observing his face for some sign, some hint of guilt or discomfort. He went to the refrigerator, got some water, and then noticed the new package of coffee on the counter. "Did you go out?" he asked, a slight tone of concern in his voice. "I went to buy coffee," I answered, still watching him. "You like to have some when you come back from football?" He nodded, seeming relieved that I hadn't asked more questions. "I'm going to take a shower," he said, and left the kitchen. I sat there, listening to the sound of the shower and thinking about what to do next. One thing I knew: nothing would be the same again. The question was, what would it be like from now on? After that Sunday, I began watching Frank with different eyes. I wasn't just a hurt wife trying to understand her husband's distance anymore. Now I was a detective, gathering clues, noticing details, trying to piece together the puzzle of our lives. Every gesture, every word, every time he left the house took on new meaning. In the weeks that followed, I noticed how Frank constantly checked his cell phone, always with the screen turned away so I couldn't see it. He'd never been much into technology, but suddenly he seemed glued to that phone. Sometimes he'd receive messages and smile to himself, momentarily forgetting I was nearby. When he'd notice my presence, he'd quickly tuck the phone into his pocket. One night, while he was showering, I heard his phone ringing on the living room table. I approached quietly and saw the name on the screen: Gilbert. I hesitated for a moment, my hand suspended in the air, wondering if I should answer. Before I could decide, the call dropped. A few seconds later, a message came in. The preview appeared on the screen. "You forgot your..." The rest of the message wasn't visible. Forgot his what? Wallet? Keys? Something more intimate? I nearly opened the message to read it, but something stopped me. Maybe the respect I still had for the man with whom I'd shared more than 4 decades of my life, or maybe the fear of what I might discover. I left the phone where it was and returned to the kitchen, pretending I hadn't seen anything. When Frank got out of the shower, the phone rang again. He rushed to answer it, taking the device to the bedroom and closing the door. I could only hear fragments of the conversation. "Can't talk right now. We'll see each other tomorrow. I miss you too." His voice was soft, affectionate, a tone he hadn't used with me in a long time. The worst part wasn't the suspicion of betrayal itself. The worst was how Frank continued to treat me at home. The daily small humiliations didn't stop. On the contrary, they seemed to have intensified, as if he needed to put me down to justify his choices. One morning, I prepared cornbread, the kind of soft, sweet bread he always loved. When I offered him a slice, he looked at the bread and then at me with an expression of disdain. "No thanks, I'm watching my health. These heavy foods aren't good for me." That same day, I saw through the window when he accepted a piece of pie Gilbert offered him in the neighbor's backyard. Another time, we were watching television, me on the big couch, him in the armchair far away, when a commercial for anti-aging cream came on. Frank looked at me and commented, "I think you should try that. Maybe it would help with those wrinkles." I took a deep breath, mentally counting to 10. "I'm 72, Frank. Wrinkles are normal at my age, at yours too." He shrugged. "Gilbert has an uncle who's 80 and looks 60. He takes care of himself, uses those creams, exercises. Each comparison, each unkind comment was like a little needle prick." I, who had always been strong, who had raised 3 children, worked outside the home, taken care of the house, now found myself diminished, questioning my own worth. I started looking at myself more in the mirror, noticing every wrinkle, every age spot, every sign that time had passed. Was that why Frank didn't want me anymore? Because I had aged? One afternoon, I decided to go downtown to buy a few things. I passed by a women's clothing store and saw a red dress in the window. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a simple dress, but it was a vibrant red that caught the eye. I entered the store without thinking too much and tried on the dress. The saleswoman, a young girl, smiled when she saw me. "It looks beautiful on you, ma'am. That shade of red really complements your skin." I looked at my reflection in the store mirror. The dress really did suit me well. It didn't make me look younger. Nothing could do that. But it made me look alive. I bought the dress, even knowing I might never have the courage to wear it. When I returned home, Frank was in the living room reading the newspaper. I showed him the bag with the new dress. "I bought a new outfit," I commented, trying to sound casual. He barely raised his eyes from the newspaper. "What for? We don't go out anymore." "I thought we could go out to dinner one of these days. It's been a long time since we went to Joe's Steakhouse." Frank looked at me as if I'd suggested a trip to the moon. "Dinner out? Why waste money unnecessarily?" I put the dress away at the back of the closet, still with the tag on. The last straw came on a Thursday night. I was in the kitchen, washing the dinner dishes, when I heard Frank's voice coming from the living room. He was on the phone, speaking quietly, but not so quietly that I couldn't hear. "I can't take it anymore, Gil. This life of lies is killing me." Silence as he listened to the response on the other end. I know, but it's not easy. We've been together for more than 40 years. How do I just come out and say it's over? That I want to live with you?" My heart seemed to stop for an instant. Live with him? Frank was thinking of leaving me? The problem is that just thinking about touching her, I can't anymore. It disgusts me, you know? It's horrible to say this, I know. She was a good wife, mother to my children. But now when I look at her, all I see is an old woman. I don't feel anything anymore. Disgust. The word echoed in my head like a bell. Disgust. He felt disgusted by me, by touching me, kissing me, probably even looking at me. I dropped the plate I was washing, and it shattered on the kitchen floor. "What was that?" I heard Frank ask, alarmed. "I have to hang up. Ellie broke something in the kitchen." I quickly bent down to pick up the pieces, tears blurring my vision. Frank appeared in the kitchen doorway. "What happened?" he asked, seeming irritated. "The plate slipped," I replied, without looking at him, trying to hide that I was crying. "I'm already cleaning it up." He stood in the doorway for a moment, as if deciding whether to help. Finally, he just said, "Be careful not to cut yourself," and went back to the living room. I continued there, crouched on the kitchen floor, picking up the pieces of the broken plate, feeling as if I were picking up the pieces of my life, my marriage, my dignity. His words kept echoing in my mind. It disgusts me. 4 decades together, 3 children, 7 grandchildren, an entire life shared, and all he felt for me now was disgust. That night, lying alone in the bed we once shared, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront Frank immediately. I wouldn't make a scene, wouldn't demand explanations. First, I needed concrete evidence. Then, I needed a plan. And finally, I needed the courage to do what had to be done. Because one thing I had learned in my 72 years of life: nobody, absolutely nobody, has the right to make you feel less than you are. The next morning, I woke up with a determination I hadn't felt in years. Sunlight filtered through the curtain gaps, illuminating what was now just my bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the photo on the nightstand. Frank and I on our 40th wedding anniversary. We were smiling, his arm around my shoulders, looking proud. What had happened to that man? To that marriage? Or had it all always been an illusion, and I just never wanted to see it? I got up, dressed, and went to the kitchen to make coffee. Frank had already left, as he did every morning lately, saying he was going to walk in the park to take care of his health. Funny how his health had become so important right when Gilbert moved into the neighborhood. While the water for coffee was boiling, I found myself looking out the kitchen window, which faced the neighbor's backyard. I saw clothes hanging on the line, and among them, a shirt I immediately recognized. It was Frank's, a light blue shirt that I had bought for him last Christmas myself. What was his shirt doing on Gilbert's clothesline? Just then, the phone rang. It was Sarah, my daughter. "Mom, everything okay? I'm worried about you. It's been a while since we've really talked." "Everything's fine, honey," I replied automatically. That answer mothers always give to avoid worrying their children, even when nothing is fine. "Richard told me he stopped by on Sunday and Dad wasn't there. Said you seemed sad." "Oh, it's nothing. I was just tired. Your father had gone out with some friends." There was a silence on the other end of the line, as if Sarah was choosing her words. "Mom, can I ask you something? Are you and Dad, are you doing okay?" I felt a lump in my throat. I wanted so badly to open up, to tell my daughter everything, to cry on her shoulder. But I couldn't. Not without being sure, not without a plan. "We're like any couple our age, honey. Sometimes good, sometimes not so much. But don't worry, this will pass." We talked a bit more about the grandkids, about her work, light subjects. When I hung up, I felt a mix of relief and loneliness. There was so much I couldn't share, not even with my own daughter. I decided it was time to act. If Frank had evidence of what he was doing, I needed to find it. Not for revenge, but to be certain, to be able to make a decision based on facts, not suspicions. I waited until the next day, a Saturday. Frank said he was going to the bank to take care of some things, and then would stop by Gilbert's house to watch a game. It was the perfect opportunity. As soon as he left, I went straight to the guest room where he was sleeping. I began searching through his things, feeling like an intruder in my own home. I opened drawers, looked through pants pockets, searched the nightstand. Nothing that seemed like concrete proof. Then I saw his cell phone on the dresser. He had forgotten to take it, something rare these days. I picked up the device with trembling hands. It was locked, needed a password. I tried some obvious combinations. His birth date, mine, our wedding day. Nothing worked. Frustrated, I put the phone back and sat on the bed, thinking what to do next. That's when I noticed something under the bed, partially hidden. I bent down and pulled it out. A shoebox, the kind people keep mementos in. I opened the lid and found several photos, cards, and small objects. On top was a handwritten card. "To F with love, G." The card had heart designs and a message that spoke of longing, of desire, of plans for the future. Looking through more, I found photos of the two of them together. They weren't compromising photos, just the two of them side by side in various places. At a restaurant, in a park, at the beach. But the way they looked at each other, how close they were, left no doubt. I also found a keychain with both their initials intertwined and a date. 05/17, 2023. Was that the day they started? A year ago, while I continued being the dedicated wife, cooking, cleaning, taking care of everything, they were already together. The discovery hurt more than I expected. Even though I already suspected, seeing the concrete evidence there, in my hands, was different. It was real. I felt a wave of anger, then sadness, then a kind of resignation. 45 years of marriage, and now this. I put everything back in the box and hid it exactly where it had been. I left the room feeling empty, as if something inside me had died, and maybe it had. The Ellie who believed in eternal love, in fidelity, in marriage vows. The next day, a Sunday, Frank surprisingly stayed home. He seemed nervous, restless, checking his phone every moment. During lunch, he barely spoke, just pushed the food around his plate. "Is everything okay, Frank?" I asked, pretending I didn't know anything. "Yeah," he answered dryly. "Just worried about something." "What is it?" He hesitated, as if choosing his words. "Ellie, I need to tell you something. Sarah called me yesterday, said you two talked, that she's worried about us." I felt my heart race. Was he going to confess? Was he finally going to tell the truth? "And what did you tell her?" I asked, keeping my voice as neutral as possible. "I told her everything was fine, that it's just age stuff." He paused, took a sip of water. "But the truth is, I'm not happy, Ellie. Haven't been happy for a long time." I waited, holding my breath, thinking I would finally hear the confession. "I think we should separate." There it was. Not a confession of betrayal, but a proposal of separation. He didn't even have the courage to tell me the truth. "Separate?" I repeated, as if I hadn't understood correctly. After 45 years? He looked away, fixing his gaze on the window. People change, Ellie. I've changed. I want to experience different things, meet new people. People like Gilbert? The words escaped before I could hold them back. Frank went pale, his eyes wide with surprise. What are you talking about? Nothing, I replied, getting up to clear the plates. I just thought it was strange you talking about meeting new people when you already spend all day at the neighbor's house. He stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. Have you been spying on me? Going through my things? The accusation caught me off guard. He was attacking me when he was the one in the wrong? I don't need to spy, Frank. I just need to look out the kitchen window and see your shirt on Gilbert's clothesline. He was silent for a moment, as if calculating what to say next. He washed it for me. We went to play ball. I got my shirt dirty. He offered to wash it. The lie was so obvious, so poorly told, I almost laughed. Play ball? You? With your arthritis? Frank blushed, this time with anger. You don't understand anything, Ellie. You never did. I want to live. I'm still alive. I don't want to spend the rest of my days looking at the past, living on memories, slowly dying in this house. His words hit me like a punch to the stomach. Is that what he thought of our life together? That it was like slowly dying? And what do you want, Frank? Say it once and for all. He took a deep breath, seeming to gather courage. I want to move out. Start over. With Gilbert? I insisted. He looked away again. That doesn't matter. What matters is that it's over between us. At that moment, I made a decision. I wouldn't cry, I wouldn't beg, I wouldn't make a scene. If he wanted to leave, let him go, but not before hearing what I had to say. All right, Frank. If that's what you want, I won't stop you. But before you go, I want us to do one thing. What? He asked, suspicious. Our 50th anniversary is coming up. Let's have a party. Gather the kids, the grandkids. One last family celebration before you start your new life. He seemed surprised by my reaction. He expected tears, screams, perhaps even pleading. Not a party proposal. You want to celebrate our wedding anniversary, even knowing we're going to separate? I want to celebrate the 50 years we spent together, the children we had, the family we built. Afterward, each goes their own way. He thought for a moment, then nodded. Okay, I think that's fair. Little did he know I had a very different plan for that party. The weeks that followed were strange. Frank and I lived like two strangers under the same roof, pretending a normalcy that no longer existed. He continued sleeping in the guest room, going out almost every day, coming home late. I continued with my routine, cooking, cleaning, taking care of the house, but something had changed inside me. I was no longer the submissive Ellie, who accepted everything in silence. Now I had a purpose, a plan. I called my children and invited them all to our 50th wedding anniversary party. I said I wanted something simple, just family, a Sunday lunch at our house. Sarah got excited about the idea, offered to help with the food and decorations. Richard promised to bring a good camera to take pictures. Mark said he'd come from Chicago with his wife and son. They all seemed happy for us, imagining we were celebrating half a century of love and companionship. If only they knew the truth. One morning, about 10 days before the party, Frank left early as usual. He said he was going downtown to take care of some bank business. As soon as I heard the gate closing, I went to the phone and called Gilbert. My heart was racing as I heard the phone ring. Finally, he answered. Hello? Gilbert? This is Ellie, Frank's wife. There was silence on the other end of the line, as if he was too surprised to speak. Oh, Mrs. Ellie, how are you? I'm fine, thank you, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm calling to invite you to lunch at our house next Sunday. We're celebrating our 50th wedding anniversary, and since you're such a good friend of Frank's, he insists on your presence. More silence. I could almost see the look of astonishment on his face. I don't know if it would be appropriate, Mrs. Ellie. It's a family celebration, isn't it? But you're practically family now, Gilbert, I replied, with a sweetness I didn't feel. Frank spends so much time at your house, you two are so close. He would be very happy if you came. Does he know you're inviting me? Of course he knows. It was his idea, actually. It was a lie, of course. Frank would never imagine I was inviting his lover to our wedding anniversary celebration. But Gilbert didn't need to know that. After a few more hesitations, he ended up accepting the invitation. I hung up the phone feeling a mixture of satisfaction and nervousness. The first part of my plan was in motion. The next day, while Frank was in the shower, his cell phone rang on the living room table. It was Gilbert. This time, I didn't hesitate. I answered. Hello. Frank, I need to talk to you about your wife's invitation. This isn't Frank, it's Ellie. Another silence, longer this time. Oh, Mrs. Ellie, I called to talk to Frank. He's in the shower. Can I take a message? No. It's about a project we're working on together. I'll call back later. Project? I asked, feigning curiosity. What project? An investment project. Banking stuff. I see. Well, you can talk to me about the invitation if you'd like. Any problem? No problem. I just wanted to confirm the time. We arranged the details, and he hung up quickly, seeming relieved to end the conversation. I placed the cell phone exactly where it had been and went back to the kitchen, smiling to myself. Their nervousness was palpable, even over the phone. That same afternoon, I went to the mall. It wasn't something I usually did alone, but that day, I felt the need to get out, to breathe different air. I walked through the stores, observing the shop windows, the hurried people, the young folks with their phones. I stopped at a women's clothing store and saw an elegant outfit, a navy blue skirt and a cream silk blouse. I tried it on and liked how I felt. I didn't look younger, but I looked like myself. The Ellie that existed beyond being a wife, mother, grandmother. The Ellie who still had desires, dreams, dignity. I bought the outfit to wear to the party. When I left the store, I saw an optical shop. I remembered that my glasses had had a loose frame for ages, needing adjustment. I went in, and while I waited to be served, I looked at the displays. That's when I saw the sunglasses. They weren't extravagant, just a classic, elegant model. I tried them on and liked how they looked. Sunglasses weren't an item I usually wore, but something in that moment told me I should have them. They look great on you, ma'am, said the salesman, a young and friendly guy. They complement your face. I bought the glasses too, feeling strangely powerful, as if I were transforming into a new version of myself. In the week of the party, I began the preparations. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, polished the silverware we rarely used, dusted off the best tablecloths. Sarah came to help me with the menu. We decided on dishes everyone liked. Roast chicken, baked rice, various salads, and for dessert, flan, my mother's specialty, whose recipe I cherished. You seem different, Mom, Sarah commented while helping me peel potatoes. Different how, honey? I don't know. Firmer, more determined. There's even a different sparkle in your eyes. I smiled, continuing to chop the potatoes. It's age, honey. We get wiser, more sure of ourselves. In reality, I knew exactly what had changed. For the first time in years, maybe decades, I was taking the reins of my life. I was no longer just reacting to Frank's decisions, to circumstances, to what others expected of me. I was acting, making choices, following my own path. 2 days before the party, I did something I never imagined I would do. While Frank was out, I went to the guest room, took his cell phone, and began trying various password combinations. After several frustrated attempts, I tried the date I had seen on the keychain, 05/17/2023. The numbers formed 0517. It worked. The phone unlocked. With trembling hands, I began to explore the device. I opened the messages between him and Gilbert. There were hundreds of them, exchanged over months. Some were simple notes, arranging times to meet. Others were declarations of love, plans for the future, promises to be together when everything was resolved. There were also more intimate messages describing past encounters, desires, fantasies, and there were photos and videos. Videos that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. In one of them, recorded at Gilbert's house, the two were in bed, embracing, exchanging kisses. The camera seemed to have been strategically placed to capture the moment. I heard Frank's voice, more youthful and animated than it had been with me in recent years. One day we won't need to hide. We can be together for real. I felt a tightness in my chest, but it wasn't just pain. It was also a strange sensation of liberation. There was the definitive proof, the confirmation of everything I suspected. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things. It was all real. I transferred some of the videos to my own cell phone, a simple device my children had given me as a gift, so I could enter the digital age, as they said. I wasn't very good with technology, but I had learned to do the basics. And at that moment, the basics were all I needed. If you're feeling this story so far, don't forget to subscribe. I've got more real-life stories that'll hit you right in the heart. After returning Frank's cell phone exactly as it was, I sat on the edge of the bed, breathing deeply. What I was about to do would change everything. Not just my marriage, which was already over, but also my relationship with my children, with my family, perhaps even with my friends and neighbors. People would judge, talk, point fingers. Was I prepared for that? I closed my eyes and thought about my life. The decades dedicated to a man who now said he was disgusted by me, who humiliated me daily, who planned to abandon me without even having the courage to tell the truth. And I decided that yes, I was prepared. Because worse than other people's judgment is living without dignity, without self-respect. On Sunday, the day of the party, I woke up early. The sun came through the gaps in the curtain, like a promise that this would be a decisive day. I put on the new outfit I had bought, combed my hair carefully, applied a discreet lipstick. I looked at myself in the mirror, and for the first time in a long time, I liked what I saw. Not an old woman someone would be disgusted by, but a 72-year-old woman, with wrinkles, yes, with signs of time, but also with strength, with history, with value. Sunday dawned sunny, as if the heavens themselves wanted to witness what was about to happen. I finished getting ready and went to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. Frank appeared shortly after, already dressed in a light dress shirt and dark pants. He had shaved and put on his best cologne. For whom? For me, his wife of 50 years? For the children and grandchildren? Or to impress Gilbert, who would arrive later? "Good morning," he said, sitting at the table. "Good morning," I replied, placing a cup of coffee in front of him. "Did you sleep well?" "Reasonably," he answered, looking at the newspaper, avoiding my gaze as usual. We sat in silence for a few minutes, just the sound of the spoon hitting the cup as he stirred sugar into his coffee. This is what we had become. Two strangers sharing a space, unable to maintain a real conversation. "What time are the kids arriving?" he finally asked. "Around noon. Mark is coming straight from the airport. Sarah's already on her way to help me with the lunch. Richard said he'll come right after breakfast." He nodded, still looking at the newspaper. "And, did you invite anyone else?" The question was asked with a casual tone, but I noticed the tension behind it. He wanted to know if Gilbert would come. Of course he wanted to know. "Just family," I answered vaguely. "And Gilbert." Frank choked on his coffee, coughing several times. "Gilbert? Why did you invite him?" I shrugged, feigning innocence. "You spend so much time at his house, I thought you'd like him to be here on this special day. After all, he's become a great friend of yours, hasn't he?" "Friend, yes," Frank replied quickly, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "But it's a family celebration, Ellie. I don't know if it's appropriate." "Why wouldn't it be? He's practically family now. You don't see your own family as much as you see him. Don't you want your dear friend to be here?" Frank looked at me with a mixture of surprise and suspicion. He wasn't used to this tone, this Ellie who questioned, who provoked. I just think that, well, never mind. If you've already invited him, there's nothing to be done. He got up, leaving his coffee half finished, and went to the guest room. I heard the door close, and then the low sound of a phone conversation. He was calling Gilbert, probably trying to arrange something, to create some excuse for the lover not to come to the party. I smiled to myself, continuing to arrange the kitchen. Let him think he still had control of the situation. Soon he would discover he didn't. Around 10 in the morning, Sarah arrived with her 2 children. Peter, 15, came right over to hug me. "Grandma, you look different. Are you even wearing lipstick?" I laughed and kissed my grandson's forehead. It's a special day, isn't it? 50 years isn't for just anyone. Sarah began to help me with the final lunch preparations, while the children watched TV in the living room. Frank came out of the room and greeted his daughter, trying to act normally, as if this were just another Sunday with the family. "Dad, you and Mom should take a picture together before everyone arrives," suggested Sarah, pointing to the camera she had brought. "You both look so elegant today." Frank hesitated, looking at me as if asking for help. "I think we can take it later, with everyone." "Don't be shy, Frank," I said, drying my hands on the dish towel. "Let's take it right now. It is our day after all." Reluctantly, he positioned himself beside me in the living room. Sarah adjusted the camera, asking us to stand closer together. I felt Frank's body tense next to mine, as if the mere fact of touching me deeply bothered him. "Smile," Sarah asked. I forced a smile, thinking about how this would probably be the last photo we would take as a couple. He also smiled, but it was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The photo perfectly captured what we had become. 2 strangers posing as if they were still husband and wife. Shortly after, Richard arrived with his wife and their 3 children. He brought a bottle of sparkling wine for the toast and a decorated cake with the words, "Golden Anniversary, Ellie and Frank." Seeing those words written in golden frosting brought me a mixture of nostalgia and sadness. 50 years together, and in the end, what remained? Around noon, Mark arrived from Chicago with his wife and son. The house was full, noisy, like in the old days when the boys still lived with us. The children ran in the backyard, the adults chatted in the living room, the smell of food filled the house. It seemed like a perfect Sunday family scene. Only Frank and I knew it was all a facade, a final act before ending the play. "Where's Gilbert?" I asked Frank when we found ourselves alone in the kitchen for a moment. "He said he would come." Frank stirred the ice in his drink, avoiding my gaze. "I think he's not coming. He must have had some unexpected issue." "What a shame," I replied, checking the rice in the oven. "He seemed so excited when I called yesterday to confirm." Frank looked at me in surprise. "You called him yesterday?" "I did. I wanted to make sure he would come. After all, it's such a special day for us, isn't it, Frank?" Before he could respond, the doorbell rang. Frank paled. "I'll get it," I said, heading for the door. When I opened it, there was Gilbert, standing awkwardly on the porch, holding a gift-wrapped box. He was well-dressed, in a navy suit that made him look younger than his 55 years. "Mrs. Ellie," he greeted, extending the package. "Congratulations on your anniversary." "Gilbert," I smiled, accepting the gift. "I'm so glad you could come. Frank will be thrilled. He was just wondering if you would make it." Gilbert entered hesitantly, his eyes scanning the room as if looking for an escape route. When his gaze met Frank's, who was standing frozen by the kitchen door, there was a moment of silent communication between them, a mixture of panic and resignation. "This is our neighbor, Gilbert," I announced to the family. "He and Frank have become great friends since he moved in next door." Sarah smiled, coming over to greet him. Mark and Richard also introduced themselves, completely unaware of the tension in the air. "So, you're the famous Gilbert," Richard commented. "Dad mentions you all the time." "Does he?" Gilbert asked, nervously adjusting his tie. That's very kind of him." I observed as Gilbert sat on the sofa, uncomfortable, trying to make small talk with my sons. Frank remained standing, glass in hand, looking as if he might faint at any moment. I noticed how he avoided making eye contact with his lover, how he kept glancing at his watch, probably counting the minutes until all this was over. The lunch was served, and everyone took their places at the table I had arranged with such care with Sarah. The white lace tablecloth, saved for special occasions, the porcelain dishes, the silver cutlery. In the center, colorful flowers in an arrangement my daughter had made. It seemed like the perfect setting for a golden anniversary celebration. No one could imagine what was about to come. Frank sat at the head of the table, as he always did. Gilbert ended up sitting on the other side, between Mark and Richard. I sat at the opposite end, facing Frank. From there, I could observe the two of them, their tense expressions, the way they avoided looking directly at each other, afraid of arousing suspicion. The lunch proceeded with apparent normality. They complimented the food, talked about work, the children's school, politics, the usual topics for a Sunday lunch. Occasionally, Frank would look at his watch, as if counting the minutes until all this was over. When we finished eating, Sarah suggested we make a toast before dessert. Richard opened the sparkling wine bottle he had brought and filled the glasses. Everyone stood, glasses in hand. "To my parents," said Sarah emotionally, "who taught us the value of family, of respect, of true love. 50 years together is an example for all of us. May many more years of happiness come to you." "To our parents," echoed Richard and Mark. "To you," said Gilbert, raising his glass toward the two of us, a tense smile on his lips. Everyone drank, except me. I placed my glass on the table, calmly, and spoke. "Before dessert, I have a surprise, a special memento of these 50 years. "A surprise?" Frank asked, his voice faltering and betraying his nervousness. His eyes darted from me to Gilbert as if trying to guess what I might have prepared. "Yes, dear, a special memento of these 50 years together." I kept my voice calm, almost sweet, as I stood up from the table. "Richard, could you help me bring the television closer to the table? I want everyone to be able to see well." My always helpful son immediately got up. "Sure, Mom. Where do you want it placed?" "Right here, facing the table." I indicated a strategic point from where everyone could perfectly see the screen, especially Frank and Gilbert. While Richard adjusted the TV, I took my cell phone out of my pocket. A simple device, as I've mentioned, but one that at that moment carried the bomb that would explode our 50-year marriage. I felt all eyes on me, curious, anxious, except for those of Frank and Gilbert, who looked panic-stricken. "Did you put together a video with old photos?" asked Sarah, excited. "What a great idea, Mom." "Something like that," I vaguely replied, connecting the phone to the television with Richard's help, who knew how to do these technological things. Frank stood up abruptly. "Ellie, we don't need this. We're all here already celebrating. We don't need anything else." "Of course we do, Frank," I replied, looking him directly in the eyes. "It's our 50th anniversary. It deserves something special, don't you think?" Gilbert also shifted in his chair, uncomfortable. "Mrs. Ellie, I think it's getting late for me. Perhaps I should leave now, let the family celebrate in peace." "But you just arrived, Gilbert," I said, without taking my eyes off Frank. "And you're practically family now. You have to stay to see this." The mood in the room changed. The relaxed smiles gave way to confused expressions. My children exchanged glances, sensing that something strange was happening, but unable to understand what. "All set, Mom," said Richard, returning to his place at the table. "Everything's connected. Just press play." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. This was it. There was no turning back. "Before showing the video, I want to say a few words." My voice sounded firmer than I expected. 50 years is a long time. We go through a lot together. Joys, sorrows, achievements, defeats. We raised children. We saw grandchildren being born. We grew old side by side. I paused, looking at my children, who were watching me with attentive expressions. But things aren't always as they seem. Sometimes we live years and years of lies without realizing it, or realizing it, but pretending we don't, because it's easier, less painful. Frank took a step toward me. Ellie, I think we should talk privately. The children don't need to hear this. Hear what, Dad? Asked Mark, confused. What's going on? Nothing, Frank quickly replied. Your mother is just tired, emotional about the date. No, Frank, I cut in firmly. I'm not tired or emotional. I'm as lucid as I've ever been, and they have the right to know the truth. Everyone does. I pressed play on my phone. For a terrible moment, I thought it wouldn't work, that all my courage would have been in vain. But then the TV screen lit up, and there it was. The video of Frank and Gilbert in bed, embracing, exchanging caresses and words of love. The silence that followed was absolute. No one breathed, no one moved. It was as if time had frozen. On the screen, Frank's voice sounded clear. One day we won't need to hide. We can be together for real. Finally, Sarah let out a muffled cry, covering her mouth with her hands. Richard and Mark watched open-mouthed, alternating their gaze between the screen and their father. The children, not fully understanding what was happening but sensing the tension, remained quiet. Frank lunged forward and turned off the TV with an abrupt movement. His face was red, his eyes full of anger and shame. Have you gone crazy, Ellie? In front of our children? In front of our grandchildren? Crazy, I repeated, maintaining my composure. No, Frank, I would be crazy if I continued living in this lie. If I continued accepting your humiliations, your contempt, your disgust. Gilbert stood up, looking smaller than he was, hunched over with shame. I'm leaving. No, Gilbert, I said. Stay. You two have a lot of explaining to do. Mom. Sarah approached me, eyes full of tears. Did you know about this? How long? I found out recently, honey. But the humiliations, those had been going on for years. Your father made sure to remind me every day how old, ugly, undesirable I was, how disgusted he was by me. Dad, is that true? Richard asked, his voice choked. Did you treat Mom like that? Frank looked lost, cornered. He looked at his children, at me, at Gilbert, who remained standing by the door, wanting to escape. It's not quite like that, he tried to defend himself. Your mother is exaggerating. We had problems like any couple, but... Disgust, Frank, I cut in, without raising my voice, but firmly. That was the word you used on the phone with him. You said that just thinking about touching me made you feel disgusted, that you only saw an old woman when you looked at me. Tears were running down Sarah's face. Richard had his fists clenched, trying to contain his anger. Mark was standing, looking as if he didn't know what to do. Dad, he finally spoke, do you have anything to say? Frank took a deep breath, running his hand through his gray hair. For a moment, I thought he would finally have the courage to admit everything, to apologize, to try to explain. But he just looked at Gilbert and said, "Let's get out of here." The words fell like stones in the silence of the room. He didn't even try to deny it, explain it, or apologize. He simply decided to leave with his lover, leaving behind 50 years of marriage and a family in shock. Gilbert hesitated, looking at all of us with an expression of guilt. Frank, I think you should talk to your family. Explain. I have nothing to explain. Frank cut him off, grabbing his car keys from the table. She already showed everything, didn't she? What else do you want to know? Richard took a step forward, placing himself between his father and the door. You can't just leave like this, without explaining anything. Mom dedicated her entire life to you, and this is how you repay her? Get out of my way, Frank growled, pushing his son. No, Dad, Mark intervened, holding his father's arm. You're not leaving like this. For a moment, I thought Frank was going to hit his own son. His expression was one of pure anger, of someone cornered with no way out. But then his shoulders sagged, and he seemed to deflate. What do you want me to say? He asked, his voice defeated. That I'm gay? That I've always been? That I've lived a lie my whole life? That I married your mother because it was what was expected of me? Because I didn't have the courage to admit who I was? The silence that followed was deafening. No one knew what to say, how to react to this late and forced confession. "That doesn't justify how you treated Mom," Sarah finally said, her voice trembling. "She didn't deserve this. Nobody deserves to be treated like this. You could have been honest, could have ended the marriage with dignity. Instead, you chose to humiliate her, to make her feel old and undesirable when the problem was always with you." "I know," Frank mumbled, without looking at anyone. "I know." It was the first time I'd seen him admit any guilt. Not that it erased years of humiliation, of contempt, of pain. But it was something. An acknowledgement, however small, that he was wrong. "If you've always been like this," continued Richard, choosing his words carefully, "why did you marry Mom? Why did you have children?" Frank finally looked at me, a tired, defeated look. "Because that's what people did back then. Nobody could be different. You got married, had children, followed the life everyone expected. I thought I could do that I could be normal. And it worked for a while," I said, feeling a strange compassion for this man who had been my husband for 5 decades. "In the beginning, you loved me, in some way, didn't you?" He nodded slightly. "In some way, yes. You were good, kind. I liked your company. I liked our family. But something was always missing. Always." "So why did you start treating me so badly in recent years?" I asked, the question that had been hammering in my head for so long. "Why the contempt, the humiliations?" Frank looked away, not answering. It was Gilbert who spoke, for the first time since the video had been shown. "Because he felt guilty. Guilty for living a lie, for cheating on you, for feeling what he felt for me. And instead of taking on that guilt, he transferred it to you. It was easier to blame you, to say that you had aged, that you weren't attractive anymore, than to admit that the problem had always been with him." Frank looked at his lover with a mixture of surprise and irritation, as if he didn't expect such a direct and honest analysis. "Is that true, Frank?" I asked. He sighed deeply. "Maybe. I don't know. All I know is that I couldn't go on living like this. I was going to tell you, Ellie. I was going to ask for a divorce." "Without telling me the truth?" I questioned. "Without giving me that dignity?" He didn't answer, and his silence was answer enough.